Now, tonight's speakers, you never want me to read their bios anyway, so I will turn it over to them to introduce themselves, but I'm going to take long enough so that Craig finishes chewing. And oh, you're the third speaker. Okay, I'm sorry. I was going beauty before age, but you know. So is it going to be in reverse order? So it would be Scott Coleman, and then Shaye Beckler, and then Craig Cornelius. Okay, that's about the way I do things. All right, thank you. Oh, and please keep your questions till the end of the talk so we can stay organized here, and then we will come around with the microphones because we're trying to record this and we need to get your question. Or if you've ever seen that happen on YouTube and there's a lot of dead space, it drives people off of the video. Okay, thank you very much.
Great. All right. Well, thank you, Joe, for the introduction. And first, I just want to say welcome to Google, and welcome to all the visitors from all kinds of different companies, and also our co-presenters and the Googlers. We're excited to have you here and to spend the next hour talking about the Endangered Languages Program. My name is Scott Coleman. I run partnerships for a group within Google called Social Impact. We focus on building products that help to keep people safe and civically engaged, like crisis response and elections and politics. And I've had the privilege to work on the Endangered Languages Project for the last few years. And so I thought I would just start with a fairly obvious point about languages. They're very important to Google. We can't organize all the world's information and make it universally accessible without all the world's languages. And so this is an area where we spend an enormous amount of time and resources in our products. And Craig will talk a little bit later about how we do that technically. And it's not just a side effort for us, it's a really core part of our product development process. And so I realized today, when I was getting ready for this talk, that I actually had no idea how many languages we had in search. So I did it the non-scientific way. I went into my settings tab and I counted the checkboxes for the languages. And there's about 150. Out of those 150, there's some more interesting languages like Klingon and Hacker and Elmer Fudd. So if you discount some of those, there's a little bit south of 150 real languages that are supported in our products. And I think that just goes to show you the breadth and the scope of what we're trying to do when we talk about languages with Google. But that's not really the whole story. I think one question you could ask, and many of the people in the room will know this answer better than I will, is how many languages are there? A decent answer is more than you think. A better answer is about 7,000, and an even more accurate answer, sadly, is less than there was a year ago. And that's because 40% of them are endangered, and we're losing them. My work at Google has involved living in 4 different foreign countries. I speak 4 languages myself relatively well, speak 2 pretty terribly. So languages are something that are very near and dear to my heart. And so I was very excited in 2011 to have the opportunity to work on this project. Actually, I need to move to the next slide. And so with a great group of founding partners, including First Peoples Cultural Council, the University of Hawaii, and University of Eastern Michigan, we decided to put together a project and answer the question, could technology help to preserve endangered languages? And so we got some product people in the room, we got engineers, we got community outreach folks, and sat down, linguists, and sat down and said, hey, what can we actually do here? And what we came out of it was that we could build a place that would be a repository for languages, that would provide you some resources and some information, but more importantly, serve as a network to help connect the people who are working on these issues, and build a platform and a site where they could come together and help in the preservation of languages. And so the project officially launched in June of 2012, and since then has been going strong, largely under the First Peoples folks with Shaye. They've continued to meet, have regular meetings, do community outreach, increase traffic to the site, and we couldn't be more proud to support this effort. And so with that, I'd like to introduce Shaye Beckler. She's from First Peoples in Canada, and she's going to tell us about why languages are disappearing, why it matters, and what we can do about it. So welcome, Shaye.
Great. Okay, can everyone hear me okay? All right, I have a tendency to be a little bit of a quiet talker, so let me know at any point if it's too quiet. I just want to begin by thanking you so much for joining us on your Thursday evening. It's really great to see such a strong interest in this topic. As Scott mentioned, my name is Shaye, and I work for an organization called the First Peoples Cultural Council. We are a First Nations-run organization based in British Columbia in Canada. And our mandate is to support BC First Nations communities in their revitalization efforts to do with language, arts, and culture. And we have had the great privilege over the last couple years of partnering on a global language initiative with some amazing individuals and organizations on the Endangered Languages Project. So I'm really, really excited to share this project with you, some information about it. Just by a show of hands, how many of you had heard about the Endangered Languages Project before signing up to come out tonight? Okay, great. And of those of you who had your hands raised, how many of you have actually spent some time interacting with the website or perhaps contributed content? Great. Okay, that's excellent. Yeah, very, very good. Well, I hope whether you're familiar or maybe not so familiar with the project, that you'll be able to take away some useful information tonight. I've been with First Peoples for about 6 years in various capacities. I did a lot of on-site community training facilitation in archiving projects. And more recently, my role with the Endangered Languages Project is to oversee our outreach efforts. I also manage a lot of the day-to-day kind of tasks and activities associated with the project, but primarily the outreach of the project. So before we just talk specifically about the ELP, I thought it'd be important to provide a general overview on the current status of languages on a global scale. I also want to talk a little bit about some of the reasons that are attributed to language loss. Look at some of the different revitalization strategies and efforts that are happening all over to reverse this loss. And then also, of course, talk about the Endangered Languages Project and where it fits in with all of this. And then I guess with any questions, maybe we can hold those till the end of the talk tonight, and that'd be great. So having said that, let's look at what language looks like on a global scale. So an estimated 7,000 languages are spoken across the globe today, yet according to linguists, almost half of these languages are at risk of losing their last speakers sometime in the next 100 years. So this, of course, is a huge loss, not only for the speakers of these languages, but really for the world at large. When we lose a language, we lose a unique way of seeing the world. Language is fundamental to cultural identity. And there is actually growing evidence of a link between a strong cultural and social and linguistic identity and other positive outcomes such as well-being in other areas like social, mental, and physical health. I actually brought a few different research papers with me, so if you are interested in looking...
Who is it?
Oh, is that... No, oh, okay, where did that come from? So I was just going to say, though, if you are interested in looking at some of these research papers and looking at the connection a little bit more closely, I'm happy to share those resources with you after the talk, and I have some copies with me. So there's linkages between lower rates of suicide, lower rates of diabetes. So there's some really interesting studies that are coming out. With the exception of monolingual countries, we can observe language loss in nearly every country in the world. There are many different reasons attributed to language loss. Colonization is one big reason through various language policies and assimilation processes. As an example, in Canada, we had the residential school system. Some of you might be familiar with that. That's basically where children were removed from their homes and, participated in school, but they were not allowed to speak their language. In fact, they were punished if they were speaking their language. So this, of course, has had some really negative effects in this sense. And I believe there is a similar idea in the United States with boarding schools that might be very similar to the residential school system. And I was shocked to actually learn that the last residential school closed in 1996 in Canada. So it's really not that long ago that these things were happening. Changes in values and attitudes of a community is also a reason for loss of language. For example, parents of children might feel that their children should be proficient in English or another dominant language, for reasons of being more successful in today's business and society. So they might shift to using a different dominant language. The media has also been attributed as a reason for this loss. Much of mainstream media today, of course, is in English or in other dominant languages. I thought, though, it was important worth noting that this idea of citizen media has kind of created a bit of shift in this sense. So by citizen media, I mean your everyday people taking charge and creating their own media. So bloggers, people creating podcasts, people networking and creating different social media groups. And we're seeing more and more Indigenous languages used in these domains, and that's really exciting. So what is being done? Well, all over the world, communities are working on revitalizing their languages. So basically any activity that involves trying to change the language shift and language loss can be considered a revitalization activity. There's numerous different strategies, but I wanted to just touch on two. Language documentation and archiving is one of them. For an example, in BC, we're home to 60% of the Indigenous languages of Canada. That means that we have 34 unique languages, over 61 dialects, and 203 First Nations communities. So BC is a very, very diverse province. Sadly, all 34 of those languages are considered to be endangered. The average age of our fluent speakers is quite old, so some of these languages only have a handful of speakers left. So there really is this sense of urgency to archive and to document the language while these speakers are still with us. Something else I wanted to share is some of the immersion programming that communities are using to revitalize their languages. There's two models that we've seen as being quite effective. One is the language nest model, and the other is the master apprentice model. Just by a show of hands, who's heard of the language nest model before? Okay, just a couple of you. What about the master apprentice method? Sort of, a couple? Okay. So both of these are really interesting strategies. Language Nest basically allows children 5 and under to be immersed in the language in a home-like setting. So there's no formal teaching of the language. It's acquiring language very naturally. And we've seen some really positive outcomes through the Language Nest model. If any of you are planning on going to the International Conference on Language Documentation next week in Hawaii, don't know if any of you are planning on going? No? Okay. Well, if you do get the chance, it happens every 2 years, and there's a really great field study in Hilo on the Big Island, and you can see some of the amazing immersion programming in effect with the Hawaiian language. They're using Language Nest, they're using immersion, they're using this master apprentice method, which I'll talk about in a moment, and they're doing some great things and promoting their language. The other method that I was going to talk about briefly is the master apprentice method. It actually was developed right here in California. Dr. Leanne Hinton from the University of Berkeley, along with some other language experts, developed this method. And basically what it does is it pairs a fluent speaker with an apprentice or someone who's really interested in learning the language. And the two of them together, they participate in language learning, and it's a certain amount of hours over usually a 3-year term. And the end goal is to develop fluency. And again, we've seen some really good effects as a result of this strategy. So I just wanted to share some of the different efforts that are happening. Something that's really cool too is the use of technology in a lot of these immersion and other kinds of programming. I was at a conference in Vancouver a couple months ago, and I saw a master and apprentice team. The apprentice was at the conference. Her master was a couple hundred miles away in a completely remote community, and they were still able to practice the language and share language actually using Google Hangouts. So it was really cool to see how modern technology is sort of aiding in the revitalization of languages. So we don't really see it as ever replacing the knowledge of a fluent speaker, but it certainly has a role to play. And I think something like the Endangered Languages Project can make a really positive impact in this field as well. So having said that, we will begin talking specifically about the Endangered Languages Project. So what is it? Well, it's an online resource. As Scott mentioned, it launched in June of 2012, and the purpose of it is to support the world's Indigenous languages. It's a global network of language champions. It's a place to share tools, ideas. It's a place to support each other and each other's work. And it's also home of the Endangered Languages Catalog, also known as the LCAT. And this catalog currently contains information about 3,198 languages. 181 of those are US, based in the USA, and I believe about 41 are from California. So it's quite a comprehensive catalog. So the Endangered Languages Catalog actually began as a separate project from the Endangered Languages Project itself. It's supported by the National Science Foundation through a 3-year grant. And some of the high-level goals of the catalog is to inform users about endangered languages. It's it's a place where people can come and access information, of course, about endangered languages. It sets baselines for data so people can target their outreach efforts, so they can visit the catalog and see what's happening. A couple things I wanted to point out about it. You can access all this information through an interactive language map. So you're able to do that through the map, or you can search for specific information about languages by region or by country. I think a lot of people ask, well, how does it included in the catalog itself? And the 2 research teams at the 2 universities are working on collecting information for the catalog. It is a process. It's an ever-evolving catalog, so we like to think of it as a living catalog. And phase 1 of the process was to see what information already existed, so you can see all the different sources that are referenced in the catalog itself. Phases 2 and 3 are to fill in any gaps, to fill in any missing information on the catalog. So just to kind of sum up some of the high-level goals of the Endangered Languages Project, it's to make languages more visible, it's to develop an international network of language champions, and of course it's just to share ideas and support each other. And we think it can really contribute to language revitalization efforts around the world. From First Peoples' perspective, we're really interested in representing the community voice for the project. A lot of our programs are very community-focused, community-based models. So that's sort of our area of expertise from what we bring to the project. And we're really excited about being able to share information with other like-minded individuals. We see it as a good opportunity to connect with maybe other communities who are in similar stages in their revitalization efforts. So just to have a look at what kind of materials people have been uploading, we've been seeing a lot of instructional types of materials. In these 2 examples, one of them is a TPR song, and this is a teaching method known as total physical response. So you actually are doing the motions as you're saying the language, with the idea that movement is connected to language learning. The other example here is a poster of Hong Kong Sign Language. So we're seeing these kinds of materials uploaded. More and more we're seeing cultural information being shared. So in one of these examples, this is how to make wrapped cakes, and this is in an Indonesian language. The other example is Navajo string games by Grandma Margaret. So she's teaching us how to do these string games. And let me see if I can play this for you. There we go. So I won't play the entire clip, but so it's saying, my grandma tells the Navajo story of how the coyote had placed the stars in the sky and shows how to make constellations using strings.
Yeah, I don't know. Is it true or not?
And there's actually annotations embedded into the YouTube clip, so there's translations in there.
Lo ta so so nelie mai ejin. What they use. Hajon Jonon dan Naji Nana say. Yes, he's a cradle no. It I doesn't. Other for just so that none in Arjun. There's of a day on Arjun.
I'm just going to pause it there. Let's see if we can get back into the other one. Okay, great. Yeah, so it's really exciting to see this kind of content being shared. I want to also mention at this point how content, so it's shared to the website, but everything is also user moderated. So that's a question that's asked a lot is, okay, when content goes onto the website, is it vetted or what happens? So is that okay? Okay, thanks. Yeah, so everything is user moderated. So if there's anything on the website that shouldn't be there, users can actually flag content and it's removed from the website immediately until it's reviewed by our moderation team. And then it's either put back up on the site or it stays off the website. So since the project launched in June of 2012, we have 3,198 unique language pages. We launched with about 3,000, so 198 have been added. We have about 14,255 user accounts created. So these are individuals, but they're also organizations creating accounts. About 5,200 resources uploaded. So the kinds of resources are links, videos, documents, images. And really exciting, we've received a lot of user feedback to the website, and this is something that's really exciting for us. Users have submitted suggestions to the catalog. Users have submitted suggestions about the website itself. So we really encourage user feedback on the website. I also thought I'd include a slide here just about some of the challenges that we've experienced launching a new website, but also some of the opportunities and successes that have come as a result. So the first one is community buy-in, and what I mean by that is based on user feedback, we've had communities tell us that they can't really see themselves on the website. They don't know how to participate. They want to know what they'll get out of participating on the website. So with keeping that in mind, doing a lot of focus groups, a lot of workshops with our communities, we're actually relaunching version 2 of the website in a couple weeks. So I'd really encourage you to check out endangeredlanguages.com in a couple weeks. It'll look and feel quite differently. And I think that we've done some really great things to increase engagement and to just make it a much more accessible, easy to use website. One thing that we received feedback on was the searching on the website. It was really difficult to search for specific kinds of information. So now when you submit, you're able to actually tag your information, which makes searching, of course, a lot easier. So if you're interested in master apprentice models or methods, you can actually tag it with master apprentice, and anyone who's looking for that kind of material will be able to find it. Right now, a lot of the information is in the central kind of repository, but with this, I think it's going to make it a lot more user-friendly. We also, another challenge was community versus academic vision and goals. So what I mean by this is, how do we create a platform that is going to be useful for both researchers in the academic community, but also for language champions in communities? And I think the idea of the ELP itself does a really good job at that. LCAT is sort of the more academic and research part of the project, but the ELP itself does encourage community participation, and I think the collaboration of the two is really great, and having it all under one platform is really excellent. Something else that we recognize as being a bit of a challenge is that everything right now is in English on our website. Our user interface is English. So this is something that we need to look into, partnering on translations, and we're going to look into this more closely once the other website, version 2, has launched. Representation from all regions. So we do have some gaps in content, and not all communities or languages have a lot of content on the website. Being realistic about it, sometimes capacity doesn't exist in a community. Sometimes there's connectivity issues with accessing this kind of a platform. But we're really working on some more targeted outreach strategies and reaching out to communities to encourage participation moving forward. The last point I'm going to make, it's pretty general, but it's lack of general resources. And this is something that I'm going to pass along to Craig Cornelius, who's a software engineer here at Google. And he's going to talk more to that and some of the challenges with support in products and online. So I'm going to hand it over to Craig. Thank you.
You should be able to hear me. Yes. Good. This is the geek portion of the show. I should introduce myself briefly. I have been at Google 7.5 years now, and I'm in the internationalization team. We are not the people who do the translations. We are the ones who do the bits and bytes, Unicode, and we are a cross product team. So we support Gmail and Google Search and Android, and I got involved in the Endangered Languages Project as one of my several 20% that I have done. I seem to have 4 or 5 at a time. It somehow works out that way. 20% projects are where people can volunteer to do something of interest to them, can learn something new, can apprentice, and it's a great program. This was one that Jason Rissman was my first contact on this, said, oh, we need some people to do something with language, and asked the internationalization team to help. And so I said, why not? I didn't know anything about endangered languages, but I've learned a lot since. One of the things that came out of that 20%, what can we do for 20% discussion was, we have a bunch of audio files out there on the web, some of them available publicly, many of them not, or many of them in forms that are different from University 1 to University 2 to researchers, private data to a community's data, in very different forms, very different metadata, sometimes not much information. Is there a way that we can bring some of these resources together that are available out there and put them in a form where people can access them through endangeredlanguages.com and make it so that they can be widely shared and people can see what's available there? So we've actually got 4 sources of information, and my job was to make it in a form that everybody is using now, online videos. So the challenge was to take this data. The goal was to make it easily available, and these are the steps we did. Basically, I created a private YouTube channel for our partners in this. I extracted the common fields from their metadata. I actually got into their FTP servers and downloaded tons and tons and tons of audio files, connected them with the many and varied metadata. And so some of you who've done this sort of work know that metadata from one person is very different than metadata from another. I found lots of mistakes in metadata. These are academic projects mostly, and I had to basically combine data in different ways for these. And I created a summary image for each one, and that image contained usually the logo, information about the content, and then we put that in front of a video, created the video from the audio. So one image, a lot of audio, and we uploaded them to the private YouTube channels. And then these partners were able to share that with endangeredlanguages.com as they wished. And so we basically handed over these projects to them. And so some of these videos that you will see on Endangered Languages are from this work I've done. And this is a process that could be repeated. If anyone else is interested in uploading this kind of content, it can be done without too much new technical work. So this is an example. On the left-hand side is information from UCLA. They have a phonetics laboratory archive online, and it is an academic archive. As you can see there, columns and clickable things so you can actually hear the audio. But basically my job was to take that and reformat it to something like this. And so this is in this language, a summary page of what's in there. They click it, and in fact, I'll show you what happens when we click it. And this is a word list from this language.
One more time. Take it in. Ponda.
So this is the kind of data that was available. Many of these are also stories, songs, things that linguistic researchers have been gathering from many different places around the world. Many of them not found anywhere else. And the work to make this available wasn't that complicated technically, but we believe made it possible to share this in a way that is a little more accessible. And we did this for 4 audio sets. Our partners were the UCLA Phonetics Laboratory, and 116 different languages contributed data from this, over 1,000 or 1,100 audio samples. Alaska Language Center contributed many, many samples as well. I don't know exactly how many languages there were. We got smaller sets from the Great Andamanese Project, and the doctor there is one of the major researchers who collected this data from the Andaman Islands, a very remote and almost totally unvisited place until fairly recently. And even a group, a Native American group, the Mohawk Council. And this shows you an example of the Mohawk Council page, and this leads to all of their videos, which are made from their audio samples. It's a small contribution, but it makes these things available to people anywhere in the world if they have a decent internet connection. I'd like to shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about what we can expect from things like endangered languages, or for endangered languages on the web. As we all know, we'd love to have all the endangered languages be able to use exactly the same technology that are available for major languages such as French or Chinese or Japanese or English. You probably would expect that that's not possible, but technology should do the right thing. People expect that with the major languages. What does that mean? Well, it means that the characters appear. It means that people can type text in there. It means that people can store things and retrieve them. We expect that. Can we expect that for all languages? Well, for the major ones, surely. Also, we expect that voice and video can be put out there now. I just added this line fairly recently, realizing that almost everybody knows how to make a YouTube video. Almost everybody knows how to store audio, and that's expected. It's standard now. There's advanced things like text processing, and this is as simple as when you double-click on a word, or when you double-click on a screen, what is selected, especially in languages that don't separate by spaces. Knowledge of word boundaries, knowledge of sentence boundaries, things like capitalization, things like sorting. How do you put lists in order? Those things we take for granted in major languages. Searching, comparing different words, and more important all the time is speech, understanding. When you speak into your phone saying, OK, Google, or whatever other service you're using, and it responds by usually understanding what you said or doing some comical approximation of what you said. And then also when text is converted to speech. For some major languages, that's expected now. You get some reasonably natural sounding text out. And so for the major languages of the world, maybe on the order of 80 to 100, we can expect this to happen, and it's getting better and better with these. But what about the other languages, the long tail, beyond the 100 languages? I started thinking about this, thinking, oh, well, we should do the same thing for these endangered languages. For the long tail, what about Albanian? What about large language groups that still are small compared to Chinese and Japanese and Swahili? And the answer is, I don't think we should do the same thing at all. I think we should have different expectations. For example, some of you have heard of the Common Locale Data Repository, CLDR. It stores information on over 200 languages. Should we have all that information on all of the 7,000 languages in the world? A, is it feasible? And B, would it be a good idea? The answer in my mind now is no, it's probably not a good idea. Why? Because you can't even collect the data. Many of these languages aren't even written or very, very poorly documented. So in principle, getting that data is probably not possible. And also, it may not be useful. It may be a waste of effort, and to burden the standards organizations with these things that very few people will actually use probably isn't the best idea. But I think we can expect that every language that has a written form should be able to be represented in Unicode. so that we will always be able to type the data and store it and retrieve it for display online. That exists for almost every language now that's written. There are a few languages where their scripts are not codified, but almost all the living languages now are there, except for Klingon. There is no Klingon script supported in Unicode, and probably never will be. Is it endangered? Well, that's up to you to think about. But the writing systems extend far beyond Latin, Greek, Cyrillic, and the other, and Chinese, Japanese, and Arabic, and the other major written forms. Unicode, of course, includes things like Cree and Cherokee, and this one is Nko, which is a language which is written right to left. They're in Unicode now. They exist. So most people will actually be able to enter things in their languages in text, retrieve it, and in many cases display it just fine. Now, there are some challenges with things like combining characters. For example, in some languages, there's a T that is written with a crossbar on it. That can be written as one character in Unicode, and that's U0167. That means it's a particular code point, but it can also be represented by a lowercase t plus a combining character over it. So for languages that use Latin or other alphabetic forms with diacritics on it, most of that support is there already. And that should support almost every language that's written. People are inventing new scripts now and then, but they're mostly being encoded in Unicode. So that isn't a barrier to people using it. I think the barrier psychologically is people don't see the user interface in their languages, and so they don't think, oh, I can do this in my language. In fact, people tend to think that what they see is all they can do. I think it might relate to the idea that most people are afraid they're going to break the computer if they do something that they've never done before in it. I'm related to some people who are like that. And they don't try new things, as opposed to those of us who push it as hard as it can. We try new things, and we're not afraid of breaking it because we know we can generally fix it. But I do want to point out that some things are not trivial. For example, until recently, the little phone in my pocket could not handle many of the languages that are in the long tail. Cherokee, for example, was not possible to display on an Android phone. Why not? Because the font wasn't there. It's all Unicode. It worked just fine. Why couldn't you do that? Well, on your desktop, on your laptop, you can install a font. What about your phone? Ever installed a font on your phone? Yes. A few geeky people know how to do it. But unless you're willing to jailbreak your phone or have special tools to do it, you can't do it. Security reasons. Lots of good reasons why you can't do that. And so my friends in the Cherokee Nation, with whom I've worked for several years now, couldn't use it for texting to each other, couldn't use it for email. Even though Unicode support was fully there, they couldn't do it. So fonts are necessary, absolutely necessary. They're not readily available for some scripts, but that's not the biggest problem because it's fairly easy to build a font. Most geeky high school kids could build a font if they really want to. There are public tools available out there. Maybe not beautiful ones, but they can do it. But fonts aren't fully compatible. Something that works on one platform may not work on another platform, or may be incomplete, and the installation problem is a real problem. There's also the problem of, even if you have a font, is it going to be interpreted correctly by the device on which it's running, the operating system? There may be different versions of the operating systems and different versions of what's called the rendering engine. There are some open source standards which make that possible, but there's always versionitis. And so I'll admit that Shaye and some of her colleagues up in First Nations beat me up a couple years ago because Android phone did not display the characters of some of these languages from British Columbia because we didn't handle these unusual combinations of diacritics. Why? Nobody ever asked us to. Nobody ever pointed out to us that this was important. We hadn't been in contact with these people before, and the platforms were not flexible enough. We're working toward that, and we think that Android Lollipop fixes a lot of them, and we continue to work with them. But they couldn't fix it on their own, and we didn't know about it. It took us getting together. So there is a challenge. The combining forms are complicated, but mostly people can do text now, and it's getting better all the time. Another hard part has been actually inputting text. Anybody ever tried to type a language on your phone and you didn't have a keyboard for it? Yeah, how do you do that? Well, on your laptop, you can often find keyboards or keyboard overlays or something that will help you type. What is a keyboard, anyway? You push a button somewhere in the system. It translates the button you've touched, particular position on the keyboard, into a particular character. But there's software in the middle there, so that can be intermediated by a piece of software that says, oh, transform that key into any character you like. Writing that transformation method is pretty easy to do, and in fact, at the operating system level, and some of our favorite operating systems are there, that's available for many, many operating systems. But not everybody runs a laptop or a desktop these days. Many people run, do most of their work through web pages, and there are some web pages that offer virtual keyboards that do much the same thing for their own websites. There are even some browsers that allow extensions that you can install an extension on the browser that will let you pick a virtual keyboard. So we can go beyond the regular keyboard, and many languages now have these keyboards available, and we'll talk a little bit more about them. The other really interesting thing now is that touch devices can go beyond the keyboard. You don't have to stick with the QWERTY style of 4 rows and these offset columns. You can do things that are much more creative. Here's an example of a virtual keyboard that's available on Gmail and in the Chrome extension, the Chrome browser extension for Cherokee. I built this myself. It's based upon the writing system for the Cherokees. They actually include 84 characters, and so what look like Latin characters are not. They are actually Cherokee characters. Oh, this is Cherokee on my shirt. It says "Hello World" in Cherokee. So this is one model of a virtual keyboard. But many of you might have even tried other keyboards for English. How many of you have ever used a Dvorak keyboard? Anybody? Yeah. You don't have to have one keyboard. Keyboard is not built into the language. Our QWERTY keyboard happens to be there because it happens to be there and happens to be based on typewriters for a long time ago. But with some, we can do things like phonetic keyboards. So this is Cherokee phonetic. You recognize the characters there. They don't have a lot of the sounds that are needed on a Latin keyboard. So I can type Cherokee words in here, even though I don't know where the Cherokee characters are on the keyboard, but I can type TSA, tsa, LA, la, GI, gi, and type out Tsalagi, the name of the language, Cherokee. And I can communicate with my friends in the 5 or 6 Cherokee words that I know. And I can type them myself. And many Cherokee speakers actually use this as a phonetic way. They have to know English to do this, but they find that much easier. And there's something new, though. With touch devices, people can be more creative. The Cherokee language, for example, is a syllabic writing system, or has a syllabic writing system invented by the Cherokee. That's a whole other story, which I can tell you over a pitcher of beer sometime. They have a number of consonants, and then they have 6 vowels. It's a little bit like the kanas. So the vowels are a, e, I, o, u, a. And you can make combinations of ga, ge, gi, go, gu, ga, ka, ma, na, and so on. And people, this is off of the iOS platform. People can touch one of the vowels or touch one of the consonants. And the base consonants give you the ah sound, but if you touch a consonant and the o sound, you get the go sound, or the lo sound, or the mo sound. And that is a soft keyboard that's very flexible, and it's faster than actually typing in these. You don't have to remember the 84 characters. You only have this. So it's a very flexible thing. Soft keyboards open up a tremendous area of possibilities. And the cool thing is you can write these apps yourself. So, and here are some links. We have a whole set of input tools on syllabic and phonetic virtual keyboards that are available. And this is a link. And these slides may be available to you, but you can look up Cherokee iOS input or Cherokee iOS keyboard, and you'll see this as well. There's cool stuff that people can do when people are being creative. There are lots of sources of keyboards. And here are a few of them. I'm not recommending any of these, but just to point out, Keyman and Language Geek have developed a wide variety of keyboards, both for desktops and Keyman in particular has developed things for iOS and Android operating systems as well. you can look in the Play Store or App Store, and you can say Gujarati keyboard, and you can find a keyboard for your language if it's Gujarati, and you can install it, and all of a sudden, if the font is there, you can do things in Gujarati. When I actually teach an introductory class, though, on language, I ask how many people use their Google engineers. How many Android or Google engineers have actually used the iPhone or the mobile device in their native language? Very few people raise their hands. They've almost always used it in English. Why? Because they think English. They don't think about using the mobile device in Hindi or Gujarati or Swahili or even French. And they turn it on, and it's available. So many times people just don't know that they're available. But the cool thing is places like Multilingo and these other sites have developed these things. This is the Cherokee keyboard from Multilingo, and I used it to type a message to Scott a little earlier. And you can see that not only does it have the characters with the traditional keyboard layout, but it also has suggestions about the next word. So all of these things are available if people do a little bit of work. Many of them have been done already. And several weeks ago, I was in Australia working with with a language project there, and people in one day developed a new Android keyboard that worked for a language called Gurunji. All I had was a dictionary and the framework of the keyboard app, and bang, they were doing Gurunji with suggestions here. So this is cool. Now, we live in an era when these things are much easier than they used to be, particularly with the freedom of the web for people to build things. But I do want to point out that the long tail, maybe even beyond the 100 languages, we shouldn't expect too much. So things like language detection. Any of you ever used a website where it says, I think this page is in German. Would you like to translate? That happens. And so I click on it because my German is pretty awful, and I really can understand what it says, sort of. Well, that's not going to happen for Gurunji. It's not going to happen for Nishka. It's not going to happen for Cherokee for quite a while because we don't have the Google translation for these things. People haven't spent the resources on translation. So detecting the language, being a particular language, is probably not going to happen for the 6,900 plus languages. Spelling correction, did you mean, is not going to happen for the Australian languages in the outback or Papua New Guinea, or even for some of the dominant languages. Many languages with 1 million or more speakers will not get these capabilities for a while. Date and time and number formatting, it's not really language, it's more culture and country-based. You're not going to have these details for a lot of these languages. Nobody knows. Maybe it doesn't matter. Synonyms, searching, breaking up words, like if I'm saying, which many people do, housing in Mountain View now. In a search, down inside search engines, it says housing. Oh, I could look for houses. I could look for apartment. I could look for lodging. I could look for all these synonyms. I can move the words around. Mountain View housing. A lot of people are doing that these days. That's not going to happen in most languages because we don't understand the structure of the languages. So don't expect that to happen in these long-tail languages. But do we need it? Speech recognition and text-to-speech, probably not going to happen in most of these languages unless particular researchers do an awful lot of work. And machine translation, my colleagues at Google will tell you all about machine translation next month, but they won't say, yeah, those 6,900 languages, they're on their way. No, they're not. Why? Mostly because there isn't enough data. Secondarily, there isn't an economic incentive. And third, who would do the work? Because we don't have enough experts to do these things. So don't expect these things for the endangered languages. Does that mean we shouldn't do endangered languages? Absolutely not. The biggest thing I think that we can do for endangered languages, and this is more of a personal opinion than the opinion of endangeredlanguages.com, is create content and encourage people to create content. If you know a language beyond the top 100, use it online. Write emails and have people say, what the heck is that? And get your friends and neighbors and family in another part of the country or another part of the world. How many of you are from outside the US originally? Wow. How many of you speak or spoke a language other than English at home originally? Okay, I didn't because German was not a good language to speak in the United States in the 1930s, so my parents didn't pass it on. But you who spoke Tamil or Swahili or another language at home can pass that on and can communicate with your elders, your friends, your siblings. Other people, maybe you don't, but the technology is available to do it. So use it. If you're going to do this, don't invent new writing systems. We have plenty of scripts already. We don't need any new writing systems. There are a few out there that have been found on caves or that are being used, that have been used historically, that are slowly being turned into Unicode. But don't invent a new coding system unless you absolutely need it. Why? Because it's not going to be standardized and used on a wide variety of platforms for 5, 6, 10 years, because the standard process is slow. But, oh, and also, if you have a character that exists in Unicode that's a T with a dash across it or some other diacritic, use that one. Why? Any ideas? Every font that does Unicode will cover the characters that are predefined. One character, oh, T with a slash across, the font has put that in place. But has the font and the rendering engine figured out, oh, T and a dash, where do I put that dash? They often put them together wrong. So use a precomposed character and you get along just fine, if you can. Don't be inventive when you're designing your characters. Also, when you have something, you create a web page, you create any kind of content. If you can, put a tag. So if it's a Cherokee page, put this in here. Why? Search engines can use this information to return things that are the same language, even if language detection is not available. Or HTML5 and XML can use other forms. There are ways of indicating what your document actually has in it. They're not foolproof. Not every tool will use them. But if you put it out there, at some point it may be used. So if you're doing Mishka or Australian language and looking for all these documents, you may be able at some point to find all of those if they've been tagged. Language detection won't work for you, but tagging will help. If you need new fonts, you don't like the way the ones look, use what people have created already or build new and better ones. You can do that. You can also work with vendors. But I think you want to encourage people to use the languages. If you encourage people to build content, if you encourage people to text, encourage people to use email, actually show people that, oh, you can do your language on these devices you have in your pocket. You may find some limitations, but if people get the idea that, oh, I don't have to be monolingual to use this monolingual user interface. I can use this English language interface with almost any language as long as I have a font and a keyboard. People will get the idea that they can use these languages more and more. When people use them, then people get the idea, this is natural. And I think the current technologies open up a wide range of things, and you can inspire people to do this. There's a company over in Menlo Park that has a lot of user communities with different languages right now. People can write blogs in any language they want. They can't use the interface in any language they want, but they can write any text they want. So build user communities and inspire others to start doing that. So that's the end of my soapbox part. Would you like to finish this up? Sure. So back to Shaye.
Okay, so this last part here is just some of the different ways. Oh, let's just do this. Is that a bit better? Okay. Just some of the different ways that you can become involved. So this is specific for the ELP. Get to know your local language community. That's one way of doing it. Support the communities to verify language data that's already on the catalog. We really, like I said, encourage feedback and suggestions to the catalog. And support your local language communities to contribute content to the project. You can also choose to become an outreach ambassador if you're really interested in becoming more actively involved in the project. We have various roles we've already established to become involved in this project, things like giving presentations at conferences, attending events, or just spreading the word about the project itself. You can help us by spreading word about Tweet in Your Mother Language Day. So this this Saturday, February 21st, is UNESCO's International Mother Languages Day. Many of you are probably familiar with that. So we're partnering on an international campaign with the hashtag Mother Language. So it's called Tweet in Your Mother Language. It's an awareness campaign. It's to celebrate linguistic and cultural diversity. So if you're on Twitter, get on board, tweet in your mother language. That's the hashtag up there. We also are on social media. We like to post lots of interesting articles, stories about language revitalization successes in communities. And I put at the bottom there some of the different apps that we have developed for First Nations languages, specifically in BC. And the next slide down here just has a few other resources about some of the different language models and revitalization strategies if you're interested in learning more about some of these things. Like I said, I brought some resources with me, some studies, some research papers. I also brought hard copies of some of these planning and handbooks. So feel free to come see me after if you're interested in learning more. And check out endangeredlanguages.com and provide us with feedback. We're really, really encouraging all your feedback. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, so Q&A time. I couldn't even get past this, man. Here you go.
So I want to share a small anecdote about endangered script in Japanese. That is phonetic input. That's what saved Chinese characters in Japanese. Otherwise, in so many years, that would have gone on the way of extinction sooner or later. But phonetic input absolutely made sure that the Chinese character will stay in Japanese, because we no longer need to know how the characters look like, as long as we can recognize them. So I was listening to Craig's part, and I felt that this is probably true for endangered languages. If you can teach everyone to type things phonetically, it doesn't really matter whether it's Cree or if it's Cherokee or whatever, as long as some program transports that into the native script that you need to recognize. That might be one big thing we can promote. Thank you.
I think phonetic transliteration is really valuable. A lot of people use it right now. People type things in and it's converted to Hindi, or type things in and it's converted to another script. I think that's great. It does require people to have a language that they understand the phonetics of, and English is largely phonetic, but we know some limitations there. But I think it can be done better. I think we need to think about it for people who have a dominant language in the community that's other than English. If I'm in Germany and I want to do phonetic typing, I have to think about that differently. I just don't know how that's done, but I know how it's done with English pronunciation. But that's a good point.
Do we have follow-ups on that topic before we? Different topic. Okay, so on that side of the room then.
Hi, John DeRico. I'm from WordFast and also the Middlebury Institute student. I have a question for Shaye, and it was about your obstacles and challenges that you had. And you said that you're having difficulty reaching certain communities. And I'm wondering, because you gave some startling facts about certain languages disappearing soon, how are you prioritizing which communities to reach out to? Are they by the ones that are most at risk, or are the ones that are most easily accessible?
So right now, the way we're sort of reaching out to communities, we have a governance council in place, and we're trying to get lots of representation from experts from all over the world, and we're really hoping that via these experts, they're going to be able to reach out to their communities and encourage participation. We're not, I don't know if it's in terms of levels of endangerment necessarily, but we are sort of using our networks, and that's the way we're connecting with different communities right now.
I'd like to make one statement there. At Google, we don't support a lot of native languages. We have Cherokee. Why? 20,000 speakers. Why do we have Cherokee and not languages with millions of speakers? Because the Cherokee came to us and said, we'd like to work with you, and they were organized, and they have the resources to do it. But there are many language groups that we'd love to help, but they're not able to do that on their own, or they don't have the resources, or maybe they're just not interested in using the resources there. There are communities in Australia that when cell phones come, the people move away to avoid that contact with the culture. So the outreach has to go both ways. Excuse me.
Matt or new topic? Okay, good.
So you brought up some good points, Craig, but they're also not new points. I mean, ever since going back to DOS, the support for languages has always been, usually it's financial. Community has to be large enough to have the money to do it. And then there has to be the skills. There has to be the technology to make it available. And then the people who have the language skills have to somehow hook up and say, this is what a keyboard should look like. This is what a font should look like. It strikes me that it's the wrong approach, that we shouldn't have to go to Google and then go to Wikimedia to get support on Wiki and on the web, and then go to another vendor. I didn't want to mention all the other vendors, but you get the idea. So it seems to me that a group like Endangered Languages or some of the others, we now have the ability through Unicode, and we have open type fonts. Unfortunately, we don't have very good keyboard capabilities, but the people that are gathering languages together should be a vehicle for saying, here's where you go to define what a keyboard should look like, what the font should look like, how you work with the language in some generic way that the vendors can then implement it, or even provide a central place for where people can download and make use of it. Instead of, I think it's not an unreasonable request to say, well, go to Google and let them know about it, but for anyone who wants support for a language, especially in a limited community, and some of the communities don't even have technology skills, right? Not the right place to go. So we need to get out of this loop, and some of these organizations, and I don't know if it's Endangered Languages, but somewhere we should have a gathering place for the people that support languages to say, let's define what the solutions look like, so either vendors can implement it or they can generate some generic solution for open type expression of which characters to use and how to enter them, seems to me. So just a suggestion. It's not fair to put you on the spot, but maybe some of the other people have some ideas about how to do that.
Well, we have another question in the same spirit, unless you want to.
I don't know. I don't know what to say other than I agree, and I don't know exactly how to do this, but I think it's a great idea.
My question is for Shaye. I'm curious, and as I said, it's in the spirit of this previous comment here. I'm wondering if there is an interest and a need of the communities or a vision from ELP and the First Nations, First Peoples Cultural Council. Yeah. Thank you. To make ELP a viable long-term archive for these languages.
Okay, that's a really good question, and I did not actually mention this in my portion. We never actually we didn't envision the ELP to be an archive. We think there's some really great existing archives out there, so the intention is mainly a place to network and to share resources. The LCAT, of course, has the catalog and the data on the languages, but as far as ELP itself goes, we're really hoping for people to, like I said, share not necessarily original materials. And when people come to us and ask us, we want to begin to archive our language, can we archive our language with ELP? We'll direct them to an existing archive that we know of. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Hi. Yeah. Okay. Hi, my name is Iris, and I'm from that company in Menlo Park with lots of user groups. I have a question, maybe mostly for Scott. I would like to know how Google thinks about open sourcing a lot of these things. Google has a lot of technology that's proprietary to Google that could really help open up not just endangered languages, but even long-tail languages, right? I think of the example of Burmese, where we have a huge issue between Zagi and kind of Unicode encoding. We can't, most of us can't detect it, convert it, and so on. Google can. Are you willing to share it at some point so we actually really can open up that country, or is it just for Google?
Ruth Bay and I have been talking about the particular case of Burmese. Burmese is a mess online because, for lots of reasons, I have an open ICU ticket with my name on it to take the detectors and converters for Burmese and put them into Unicode, the standard. I don't know if it's going to happen in this next release, but that's on our plan. Right now in CLDR, we actually have a detector on there, so if people try to type in the non-standard Zaji, it will say, detect it and convert it. So some of these technologies are available. There's another technology, the Compact Language Detector 2 is open source. That will detect from text what language it is, and I think it covers a couple hundred languages. It was originally built by a man named Dick Seitz here, and it's been open sourced.
It's very fast.
It's very fast. He's the kind of person who would, when he was building the alpha computer for DEC, would worry about nanoseconds, and he worries about microseconds now in software. So that's one example of something that's open source. There's a lot of stuff out there in Unicode itself, and Unicode is the right place to do a lot of these things for open sourcing. Oh. Yes, a lot of fonts are being open sourced as well.
Yeah, just trying to add to that, the Noto project and the Noto project is also open source. The Roboto font, which is on the Android phones, are basically open source. You can get it from the Android 3. Basically, if there's something kind of basic technology, doesn't look very advanced like Google Translate stuff, you think Google has it, reach to some of us. We may be able to actually help open source it.
I have one more comment on slightly related to that. It's important for technical providers to be aware that more languages need to be supported, at least basics. For example, there's a project that many of you have in your pocket that originally would not support language codes of more than 2 letters. And when we pushed for Cherokee, they said, 3-letter character codes? Nah, not necessary. Now it can support that as a language code that's represented. We don't have a user interface for it, but now it doesn't choke when 3-letter characters. So technology companies should be aware that the world is bigger than the ones you could represent with 2 letters, for example.
So I just want to add that the aim of Noto fonts is to cover every character in the Unicode standard. The VMP is already covered, and so it's going beyond that right now. And so it may take time, but all the characters in the Unicode standard, which I'm unfortunately expanding every year, will be covered eventually.
People need to stop inventing new characters.
So I wanted to come back to one of the previous questions about connectivity. I've done some fieldwork in New Guinea, and there are places like, so if I go to where the languages I've worked on are actually originally spoken, there's certainly no internet access now, and I have no idea when there will be. But many of these people go to high school in a city, which is not that far away, and they have internet access, but it's very slow. And they have access on their phones, but it's very slow. So I'm wondering what efforts could be done. I know it's not easy to make websites accessible. I mean, obviously, some people try very hard to make websites accessible on slow connections. I know because I've used the connections, and it's very obvious who's made the effort and who hasn't. And so I assume it's not easy, but it can be done. So I'm wondering on the new website and in general for these kind of problems, what efforts can be made to make those people able to use the sites and then possibly contribute content. And hopefully one day their access will be faster. But in Indonesia where I work, it's New Guinea, but it's the Indonesian part of New Guinea anyway. Things move very slowly politically, and that's what you need in order to get better cell phone towers approved, and for example, and better satellite connections. And I have no idea when that'll ever happen. Maybe 5 years, who knows? So it could be important.
We need some Google Fiber people or some people who build cell networks and so on. I'm telling people hang on, because Google Loon is one example of ideas to bring internet to everybody. Maybe not fast, but internet to everybody around the world. Loon and other ideas of people flying drones everywhere, or who knows. There are ideas to bring internet to everybody. And I think that anyone who's dealing with language should realize that in 5-10 years, some of those barriers won't be there. Just like 5-10 years ago, if you would have said, oh, you can bring a device that costs $200 and capture audio in that, and then when you go home, you can upload it. That would have been, what? That's ridiculous. You can't do that. Well, now people are taking servers, putting them in villages. Stephen Bird takes a server, gives everybody in the village a cell phone, and they record speech, and he takes home a computer full of language, and he takes home the cell phones too. And then he goes to the next village and captures a huge amount of data that would have taken researchers many, 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 many hours. It's audio, and it can be analyzed later, perhaps. But that's the kind of thing that's becoming possible. I'm a language optimist, or a technology optimist. But I think it's going to become available. There are tools, I'm sure. I haven't looked it up, but I'm sure people can use tools to say, how fast is my web page? And there are people who put huge images on their web page, and they download very, very slowly. Try it on your mobile phone, you'll find out. So I think there are tools to do that. How we make people aware that they should use these tools and optimize their pages, I don't know that. Oh, Google page? Oh, good question. I don't know.
Yeah, I would have to check in with our technical team about that, but I can follow up on that. Yeah.
Good question.
Hi. So I'm a freelance translator, translated Facebook. I'm one of the top 10 translators for Facebook to my mother language. And my question now is to like all of you guys like who are heading the technology companies is that, so it's good that every company opens up translations to the users to like contribute and translate their content. But it's sometimes maybe useful for these big companies to like share this kind of information, as Iris mentioned, so that people are not just like endlessly keep on doing the same work across multiple sites, multiple companies. If it would be good like if there is a sharing of data between these different companies.
Question. What kind of share? What specifically are you talking about sharing?
So translation of native English words to native languages, once it's done, it can be shared between different sites, different companies, different technology platforms.
Mm-hmm. Glossaries and dictionaries? Mm-hmm. I think there are approaches to this. I'm not a linguist, so Shaye, do you have any?
I don't know if I can comment on that.
So can I add to that? So Wikipedia's translation memories are all open source and openly available. And you should be able to use those for UI and technical translations across 300 languages and the language pairs there. So it is open source. You can use those.
So I meant, let's say Twitter now wants to open source the translations, right?
Yeah.
And so some of that work can be done using Wikipedia, as you said.
Yeah.
And then some of it can be opened up to the users, like not entirely like doing from scratch.
Yeah, and that's the idea. To keep building that in an open way so that it can be shared across different platforms.
If I may comment on this, I think it's a great idea. It's more like a shared translation memory. The problem is that a lot of those things are domain specific. So you're going to run into issues really, really quickly. But if we could figure out a way, maybe together with TAOS, because TAOS has a common repository, right? To put some of those things in the cloud somewhere that are openly available, I think that would be a great approach, especially for kind of long tail languages where we're lacking a lot of the content, right, in bilingual format.
Hi. My question is regarding already extinct languages. If you cater for, I'm not talking about the Latin and ancient Greek languages that are very well documented. I'm talking about the smaller languages where the grandparents were talking and the grandchildren want to learn. There is some documentation or some files. How do you deal with these?
Yeah, good question. We've recently added a category on the catalog for dormant and awakening languages, and that's how we're handling those kinds of suggestions and feedback we're getting. So that's actually just been added in the last 6 months. Oh, our map has disappeared from here, but there are points on the map that show the dormant and awakening languages, and there's a whole section on our website to talk about criteria for inclusion in the catalog, but that is a new area we've added.
Do you have a percentage of how many languages are awakening?
I'm not sure off the top of my head what's been included. I know it's a work in progress, so they're still collecting information, but we could probably do a search and see what's on there so far. So the ones that are actually a black dot on the map, I don't know if you can see it that well, that's that category there. All the other points that you see are color-coded according to levels of vitality. at risk, endangered, severely endangered. So right now, the black dots are for sleeping and awakening.
Lots of black in Australia.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi. People use Latin letters for phonetic to write phonetically in their language. They do it in thousands of styles, depending on what, in which country they are living, depending on their level of education, and depending on many other things. Worse of it, there are, as far as I know, there are styles where they spell not phonetically, but using letters most closely looking like to their native language, even using numbers. So. Is there a work on search in such in texts which are written in such different styles of phonetic or even not phonetical at all?
I think the answer is sort of, in the sense that if you, for example, Navajo. I've learned a little bit about Navajo, and they write with a font encoding, which basically replaces the shapes of the characters, especially digits, with shapes that look like A's with diacritics on it. But the words that are actually stored, if you look at them as ASCII text, look like N110BL. They include digits and letters together. You can look for those strings in your favorite search engine, and it will find documents with those. But I don't know of anything that is actually looking for, I don't want to call them misspellings, but that's creative use of language, or creative use of characters. I don't know of anybody who's really doing much with that. Ruspe may.
I was also talking about things like Egyptian, Arabic, Christian, and Latin, with numbers like that. So there are various writing systems, very underdocumented. And, I mean, the traditional linguists don't look into it. What kind of modern linguists are interested in something else? They're kind of disappearing kind of between the cracks, although there's a living community.
I know that there are places where people use the approximation. They use a 3 instead of an epsilon, or 3 instead of an E in some cases, or an L instead of a 1. I'm reminded that when I first taught programming, before many of you were born, to college students, I had to remind them that no, you do not use the O key to represent a 0. Those were distinct characters. And no, you don't use a lowercase l to represent a 1. But that was fairly recent for most people to come away from typewriters, where that worked just fine, to computer input. So yes, I understand what you're saying, and no, I don't know if there's a consistent there are projects that are working on this very seriously, partly because I don't think it's attracted the attention of a lot of people who could be working on it, but I think it's a great idea. I just don't know of anybody who's doing it.
I can add to a little bit of that is you treat that as an encoding. I'm over here. Sorry. You treat that as just a different encoding, like 1252 for Russian in the past and some others. But I actually have a different question. I'm Jeff Kellum. I'm a type designer. For the written languages that you capture out of these endangered languages, do you have plans to submit proposals to Unicode in the process? We're currently going for 8.0 and next year 9.
I can comment on Unicode.
Well, the question, I think the question maybe is, are there characters that are not already encoded in Unicode in languages that we work with on endangeredlanguages.com?
I'm not entirely sure the response.
Well, it's more of as you do find them, do you have plans to actually submit the proposals because you're capturing how they're written and so on.
Right. I'm sorry, I can't comment on that right now, but I can check in with our tech team on that.
Great. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, Craig, you were talking about developing fonts and keyboards for phones.
Yes.
As far as I know, developing keyboards for Android has been possible for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Apple made it possible last year to develop keyboards and fonts and install them through end users. How do you look for fonts on Android? Can they now be installed by end users, or is it still coming?
Not that I know, and I think the reason for not installing fonts is largely a security issue. Fonts are not just passive pieces of data. They actually have little microprograms in there. And basically, I think that they open security holes.
Okay.
At this time. There are ideas about doing that, but I can't talk about them because I really don't know. But yes, it would be wonderful.
I mean, usually Apple tries to also be secure, and Apple allows third-party fonts.
I wasn't aware about that with iOS. I don't think it's possible on Android now, and I don't know anything that I can tell you about.
It's not possible on Android now.
Okay.
Okay.
I personally would love to see it, but I'm not the person who makes such decisions.
I see.
But a good point. This person over here has been holding up her hand a long time. Okay.
So I have a question about these resources. So as someone that really likes to get the resources of a language, so things like, is this word a noun? What are some of the inflections of this noun? Is it like grammatical categories, like is it masculine, feminine, is it singular, is it plural, is it past tense, future tense, all that stuff. And something that I find difficult is that there's very few resources in various languages that aren't encumbered by some sort of restrictive license, like this resource cannot be used in a commercial setting, or this cannot be combined with something else that you've collected from some other resource. And things like this makes it very difficult to interpret language, to generate language. And is there going to be some sort of resource in the future, or can you think of a resource that might be helpful for these endangered languages?
Well, I can only comment on the ELP itself, but the kinds of resources we're seeing contributed are things that people own and are happy to share on a global platform like this. I don't know if I can really comment on what I think or what I'll see in the future, but yeah, I'm not entirely sure, because a lot of things are under copyright or exist in certain like archives and things like that, so they're under copyright and different sharing rules apply to those kinds of things. I should mention though that any content that is contributed to the website remains in 100% the ownership of the person who contributed it, so they can remove it at any time, but certainly there are copyright and issues around privacy and things like that.
I guess what I'm looking for is maybe other people may be inspired, but it was just kind of like something as open as CLDR where you can just use it and, have fun with it. We don't really care about it. There's not really much in the way of copyright restrictions.
Right.
So.
Scott, do you have any ideas on this?
I was thinking that, like, getting back to a little bit of the intent of the site, right? It's about creating a network of people, and less around having, the resource sharing that can be, be combined and maybe give you that type of information. So it could be a piece of like what the intent was in the construction of it, which wasn't thinking about what's the broadest licensing framework that we could have to solve that problem. But it's a good point. I mean, I don't have much more beyond that.
It really affects, it's like machine translation. If it's encumbered by a license that you can't use, do whatever you want with it, combine it with other resources. Essentially, it's worthless.
Yep.
It's encumbered by a license that's essentially dangerous.
I know that from talking with linguistics experts recently that not only are there restrictions on copyrights and so on, but many language communities say, yes, you can do this for your academic work, but if I don't want you to publish it, because some communities regard this as their property and should not be shared indiscriminately. So there are many cultural sensitivities as well as legal things, and it's complicated. Excuse me. Sort of like being a teenager, it's complicated, right?
My question is related to the data collection. So you did some great work with the conversion of all of UCLA's files, which is impressive because we all know, I'm sure, that their phonetics program is amazing. But I'm just curious to see, like, like what partnerships with universities are you continuing to develop, and like what areas? Because I mean, obviously, there's thousands and thousands of archives of data that linguists have collected. So like, what are like what's I guess like what are the next steps with that, and what universities are you continuing to partner with?
So the two that remained as partners on the project, of course, are University of Hawaii and Eastern Michigan. So their two research teams are actively updating the catalog and taking in feedback and user suggestions. But we also have an area where you can become an Alliance member on the website. And this is where we encourage organizations who are interested in participating and contributing to sign up to become an Alliance member. And it's like them reaching out to us, but we are doing some strategic like partnerships and reaching out. But there is a space where people can contact us, and then we can discuss what kind of content they have and how they may want to see that on the project website. So if you're interested or know someone or an organization that's interested, check out the Alliance for Linguistic Diversity section. It's just off of the homepage. Yeah.
I do want to point out that what we did for uploading these things as YouTube videos was only one way of doing this. There's no reason why people can't have just audio files, but the video sharing seems to be something that everybody knows about and can use very easily. So that was the choice for that. But there are many ways of doing this. Also, the tools I used, nothing special, nothing proprietary, just a little bit of hacking. So such things could easily be developed for other purposes or other archives. But they do require understanding the archive for the metadata. That's the hard part, actually. The video and audio part is the easy part. But parsing those archives.
I just have a comment actually on sharing and the legal restrictions. I think we need to do some education in companies to encourage them that even for content that's public, they don't really want to share glossaries and translation memory. And companies should be willing to, right? But it's usually the legal department that'll step in and say, oh, no, I don't know what somebody might do with my content, even though it's public content in many cases, right? So I think a lot of education needs to happen. And TAUS is probably a good organization to partner with to do some of this education, that there's no harm in it. We're all working toward the greater good. A thought.
Great. Well, we might have time for one more question. Okay.
So I'm just going to agree with a lot of pieces of that, not specific to just the translation. But when I look at the other side of the world and the other types of projects that we work on, we do a lot of stuff in public and open spaces. And so we do work around crisis response and elections and politics, but it's in the open data world. And so trying to get to a place where the licensing structure makes sense, where it's interoperable is even a bigger problem. So I share a lot of the same sentiments and see it across a lot of the other software products that we work on.
I have a question for Shaye. I'm from the southern part of China, Guangdong, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with Cantonese. It's actually a little bit different from Cantonese in Hong Kong, and it is an accent, but actually it has its own characters. It is not officially a kind of written language, so sometimes if you type the language, you have to use pinyin to replace it, but it's not exactly the same. The reason what I'm asking is that Cantonese is spoken by a lot of people, but it is not official language, but it has a lot of rich flavors in its culture. So would Cantonese be regarded as endangered written language in this respect?
On the spot.
Yeah, on the spot. We do take a lot of criteria into consideration before a language makes it into the catalog. Some of the top 3 things I know the research team looks for: domains of language use. So is the language being used in the homes, the schools, at government level, and business? So they look at that. Another big one that they look at is intergenerational transmission. That's huge. Are the young ones learning the language? So we do have languages that have a couple 100,000 speakers in the catalog. But what we're noticing is if we're not answering yes to the question on intergenerational transmission, that's a problem. And so that language might possibly make it into the catalog because that language is not being passed on. And when we look in 50 or 60 years from now, that language, the drop in numbers of speakers might occur because of this. So there's a lot of different factors. You could definitely submit it as a suggested language, and it would get reviewed by the team, and they would take a lot of different things into consideration.
I think the Cantonese spoken in mainland China was listed as among the world cultural heritage. So it's actually passing down by accent, but I don't think the written language.
Yeah, many of the languages on EL are not written languages.
No, yeah.
Is that true?
There's a combination.
I focus on written because that's what I do. But there's no restriction on having a written form of it. You have to be able to describe it in some writing system, but don't have to be able to put lots of video, lots of audio is available.
Yeah, there's the option for video and audio uploads as well. Some of the content, like some of the languages on there, we don't actually have points on a map for them yet because there's not enough information about the exact location. So there are gaps in the catalog, but that's what we're working to fill in those missing pieces and collect information.
Currently, I've seen people they're typing like I think the language is very popular among teenagers and maybe some soap operas, Hong Kong soap operas and stuff like that. But yeah, it's not official.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
I wanted to say one thing quickly. I wanted to thank my collaborators on this who did much more of the work than I did. I volunteered to do this and realized, oh my gosh, I did this little tiny piece of EL, and I better contact First Nations or First Peoples to find out if they would participate. Shailene was going to participate remotely, but was able to come down here and take the bulk of the work. And then Shailene said, we ought to have somebody who actually worked on the Google side to start it rather than this pitiful little 20%. So she contacted Scott. So it's been a chain of me volunteering and them responding. So I want to thank them very much.
Thank you. Very interesting.
Time to talk?
It is time you have time to hang around and talk. There are restrooms out both doors, and we have a while, and we need to finish all that food, or we can't say we've been to Google.
We won't take it back.
Thank you.